Hi everyone, in today's class we are going to see about communication. So we know that communication is an exchange of ideas, opinions, emotions and feelings, and it is a two-way process. Communication can be a two-way process or a one-way process. It is a one-way process when there is no feedback is involved, where the receiver sends you a feedback about whether the information is received or not. That is a two-way of communication, and if the feedback is not received, that is considered to be as a one-way communication. So you see here, if a teacher is teaching a particular concept to a students and in a form of lecture, that is probably a one way of communication. So if there is a discussion in the process, that is considered to be as a two-way communication, as simple as such. So we know that social communication, it is a social process where we communicate in a social places, like for example we communicate with friends, people, authorities, colleagues, etc. So it's a social process, and we communicate in order to form a societal relations, and therefore communication is a social process. And communication is universal. How do we say communication is universal? Like, communication is being done by all people across all nations and across all creed and caste and religion. So it's universal, and as such, like, feelings of being universal, then communication can also be said as it is universal feeling. And it's a universal concept. We all do communicate for the same particular reasons, and so we can deem communication as universal. And we see the process of communication, it's actually involves a sender who actually sends a message, and as a form of message, the form of message, and it is being encoded in a form of a text, symbol, or an encrypted code, anything that be of, that is called the process of encoding your thoughts into a written graph or a text or a code, that is called as encoding. And the code being sent to another channel is called transmission, and the transmission is done through a channel. What channel? The channel can also be called as, either you send it as a mail or a presentation or a text or a draft, anything that will be of, that is called as a channel. And the information being sent, that is decoded by the receiver. When, if the chat, if you must have seen in WhatsApp that we have this called end-to-end encrypted, so that encrypted data being communicated in a rational idea, like a normal text, that is called as decoding. Like, we decode from the given message, we comprehend something out of the given message. That process is called as decoding, and the decoding is done by a receiver, right? So this is actually the process of communication. We can see here, guys, the modes of communication is verbal and non-verbal. So in this we can see the oral and written form or for verbals, and the non-verbal is considered to be of body language, gestures, facial expressions, eye contact and proximities. So we know obviously body language is actually like our way of communicating things through our body movements and the way our postures and all things, that is called as body language. Like, the confidence in our mind or the anxiety that we have or the nervousness can easily be found out by our body language. And the gestures can also be considered, like for example saying thumbs up or thumbs down are also called as gestures. And the way you say hello, the hand waving, all considered to be as gestures. And facial expressions can be said as if like your genuine smile when you meet your friends, or you're frowning on, all these kind of things can also be considered as a kind of communication. And then we can see eye contact. So what about eye contact? Eye contact is like, we make eye contact with people for often times. For example, eye contact will actually like show a genuine connection between a receiver and a sender. So that's why eye contact is also important. And we can see proximity. What is proximity? Proximity can also be seen or called as the distance between two people. Like, that's why we call the sensors in left called as like a proximity sensor, right? So proximity means the distance between a sender and the speaker. And it's also called as a personal space. We often speak with a particular space as or a comfort zone, right? It's called as a personal space. And more dive deep into it, it's also be our postures, the way we stand, the way we sit while we are talking to people, also subtly convey some kind of informations that are connected towards our message. And a paralanguage, Paralanguage can also be called as the tone, pitch, stress, etc. Right? And touch can also be called as haptics. So haptics means the way you touch other person's shoulder when you talk, or you jokingly hit someone through your elbows. Those either also communicate some kind of joviality, right? And silence, of course, silence and can also be called as pause. So when we maintain a pause while you talk with the people, like when you make a particular sentences and then we make a deliberate pause in order to make that message to be reached, right? We give a space for their comprehension. So they are also called as modes of communication. So now we know the types that are communication are based on modes, channels, and relationships. So we see how the communication is actually based on different types based on relationships in the next class. See now, like based on the relationships, and we can conveys that based on the relationship, the communication can be divided into formal and informal communications. You see, formal communication is based on hierarchical commands. What is actually a hierarchy one? Hierarchy means that like the order, okay? So we communicate through HODs, and HODs to vice principal, and vice principal to principals, and vice principals to the top order, right? That is called as a hierarchy, like a slab system. A chain of commands, like where higher officials will give order to the subordinates, and subordinates will convey the channels through further subordinates, right? That is called as a chain of command. And the rules is like we have informal communications, we have certain rules. We cannot use informal vocabularies, we cannot use certain phrases, and these are all called formal communications. And where we use these communications for, we use these communications for meetings, memos, lectures, conferences, and emails. Like of course in all these kind of communicative modes, we always use a formal way of communicating, where we'll stay a little bit reserved, we'll think twice thrice before uttering a word, and we try to maintain a decorum while speaking, which better awareness is necessary for formal communication. And the proper choice of vocabulary, the proper choice of tone, the seriousness in your voice, everything will be comes under the process of formal communication. And we know informal communications, we do communicate informally with our friends, our family members, relations, and people who we deem close to ourselves, right? Like that is called informal communication. And we move forward, we see dimensions of formal communications. We see dimensions means like what are all the characteristics, what are the dimensions, like how do we communicate in a formal types. We see upward communication, and we see upward communication as the information being sent from the employees to the management or the higher officials is called as upward communication, where it's being done from lower order to the higher order. And downward communication is the instructions being given by the management or higher officials to the subordinates is called as downward communication. So what is horizontal communication? Horizontal communication is the way we communicate with the fellow people, fellow students, or fellow professors, fellow colleagues. So these are all called as horizontal communication. And what is a diagonal communication? Diagonal communication means that we communicate across all levels equally, like without having any restrictions of communicating through a channel. We'll just discuss maybe in a form of communication, like a meeting, a discussion, like such. Like so we, in that place, we don't have a hierarchy. We do of course have some respect for their position, but still we do communicate across all levels. That is called as a diagonal communication. See now, like the verbal communications are transcribed into the oral, written, and visual. Now let us see, the oral communication is actually termed in these kind of ways, which are extrapersonal, interpersonal, intrapersonal. Sorry for this is intrapersonal. Okay, so we see here interpersonal means between two people. And what is intrapersonal? Intrapersonal is within oneself, like the way we talk to ourselves, right? Like the inner talk we have, the self talk we have, that's called as intrapersonal. And interpersonal is between two or three people that who we talk to. And what is extrapersonal? Extrapersonal is quite a bit tricky. That is, we talk to non-human things, like we could talk to a parrot. A parrot of course can talk back. And we talk to dogs, and possibly dogs can't talk back, but still that's also called as an extrapersonal communication. And what is an organizational communication? As we have already seen, the organizational communication, we see the modes and dimensions in a previous slide. That's like diagonal, horizontal, vertical, etc., and the hierarchy of commands and all that. And mass communication is, of course, through media forms like a telephone, a newspaper, a print media, or through like possibly like social media kind of. And we see the elements of verbal communication can be transcribed as words, tone of voice, pitch, intonation, volume, pace, and rhythm. So in this we see the tone of voice is the your naturality towards your speaking, that the purpose, we subtly change our tone according to the people who we talk to, right? For request we use a particular tone of voice, for command we use a particular tone. And pitch is about like you throw your voice according to the proximity of your listener. And what is an intonation is to avoid the monotony of the speech. We volume up and volume down or a speech according to the emphasis of the words. That's called as intonation. And volume, of course you do know that we switch volume according to the proximity of the audience. Pace is very important. Pace is like the rate of speed of choice of words, the rate of speed of words and sentences you form is called as pace. If you are speaking to a 10th standard student, you're supposed to reduce or mellow down your vocabulary and your rate of voice, like such as the pace, in order to cater to the level. And if you're speaking to the friend or colleague of your same level of English knowledge or fluency or comprehension, you can tune up to your natural pace in order to communicate. That's called as pace. And what is rhythm? Rhythm is the way you seamlessly cover the words and sentences in order to make your words or sounds much more elegant or eloquent. That's called as rhythm. And we see here what is the importance and advantages of communication. A communication should be, we should be a clarity. There should be some clarity in conversation, and it's conversations will give you an immediate feedback of emotions or complex informations we can communicate. And what are the challenges? The challenges are misunderstanding, because like oftentimes if there is no equal level of understanding of vocabulary or the fluency of a language, what actually happens there is there are a lot of choices, there are a lot of times we may misunderstand what the listener or a speaker is trying to convey. And non-verbal cues, for example, the non-verbal cues may be, sometimes we misinterpret the body language, being nervous to being lying, so it also tends to error. And language barriers, so language barriers, we know that we communicate across people from different areas, so their language acquaintance might be different than that of us. So that is called as a language barrier. And the challenges of non-verbal communication is ambiguity. For example, we often confuse the body language. We may not interpret every body language as we think, but sometimes it might have some other meaning deep down. So for example, if we see people being haste or hurried when they talk to us, we may think of it as their lack of knowledge or being anxious, something kind of that. But they may be, it's their natural tone to speak louder or to speak fast. So these kind of interpretation of non-linguistic communication, what happens is this is the problem, is ambiguity, unclearness. And incongruence means that one particular gesture may not actually represent a particular idea. That is called incongruence. And cultural variations, it's very important one, you can mark it important, because a particular gesture in one community or in one creed or in one nationality might be an inappropriate one in another. For example, like you showing particular kind of gestures in India might be different than that of in China, right? We for example, a lot of things are there, like simple cannot be that. So these are all the things. So with this I conclude, and I hope you understand what is communications and what are all the complexities that we have. And we know what do we take as a, we have covered up. Let's see, let me summarize. We see what is communication, and we have seen what are all the modes of communication, and we see the difference of communication based on relationships, and we have seen verbal communications, its type and elements of communication, elements of verbal communication, and the clarity, like for example the importance and disadvantages and advantages of verbal and non-verbal communication. So with this I'll conclude.